At the company's awards dinner, I found my seat at the back table next to the kitchen. My husband's assistant, Victoria, smirked as she walked past in her tight red dress. "I guess you don't count," she said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. I sat there, my hands trembling in my lap, staring at the polyester tablecloth. Around me were junior employees I'd never met, kids fresh out of college who kept glancing at their phones. The clinking of dishes from the kitchen behind me was so loud I could barely hear the speeches starting on stage. For 32 years, I'd been Mrs. Richard Coleman. Richard, the CEO of Coleman Analytics, the man whose company I'd helped build from our garage. I'd typed his first business proposal on our kitchen table while nursing our daughter. I'd taken out a second mortgage on my mother's house to fund his initial expansion. I'd hosted clients in our home, smiled through 1,000 dinners, played the perfect corporate wife. And tonight, at his company's biggest awards ceremony, celebrating a deal worth $40 million, I was seated next to the kitchen. I looked up at the stage. Richard stood there in his custom Italian suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his hands gesturing confidently as he spoke about vision and leadership. The ballroom lights made him look like a movie star. Everyone was watching him with admiration. Everyone except Victoria. She stood at the side of the stage holding a tablet, supposedly ready to assist with the presentation. But she wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at my husband, and the way she looked at him made my stomach drop. It was the look I used to give him years ago when we were young and building dreams together. Soft, intimate, possessive. Richard glanced at her just for a second and smiled. Not his professional smile, the real one, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. My chest tightened. The noise of the ballroom faded into a dull roar. I watched them, really watched them. The way Victoria anticipated his needs before he asked. The way she touched his arm when she handed him papers, her fingers lingering just a moment too long. The way he leaned toward her when she whispered something in his ear, his hand briefly resting on the small of her back. Oh God, how long had this been happening? I thought back to the last 6 months. Richard working late constantly. Business trips that seemed to multiply. The way he'd grown distant, distracted, barely looking at me during dinner. I'd told myself he was stressed, that the big merger was consuming him. But it wasn't the merger, it was her. Victoria laughed at something he said, her hand on his shoulder now, comfortable and familiar. On her wrist, I noticed a delicate gold bracelet. I'd seen that bracelet before, in a jewelry receipt I'd found in Richard's car last month. He'd told me it was for a client's wife. My throat burned. Richard continued his speech talking about loyalty and partnership. None of this would be possible without the people who believed in me from the beginning, he said, his voice warm and genuine. The audience applauded. He didn't look at me, not once. Victoria did, though. She looked directly at me, sitting at my table by the kitchen, and her smile widened. She knew I'd figured it out, and she didn't care. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just an affair. This was a replacement. She wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was standing in the light next to my husband, playing the role I'd been written out of. The seating arrangement wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I picked up my purse with shaking hands and stood up. The young man next to me glanced up from his phone, startled. I didn't say anything. I just walked. My heels clicked on the marble floor as I moved toward the exit. A few people noticed, but most were focused on Richard's presentation. The heavy ballroom doors closed behind me, muffling the applause. The hotel lobby was quiet and cold. I stood there for a moment, unsure where to go. My car was in the parking garage. My house, our house, was 20 minutes away. But I couldn't go home. Not yet. Not until I could breathe. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. A text from Richard's number. "Where are you? I need the Madison file password. Call me now." I stared at the message. The Madison file. The presentation he was giving right now depended on data I'd compiled last week. Client contacts I'd maintained for years. Financial projections I'd organized. He'd asked me to help out with the merger preparation, never mentioning I wouldn't even be acknowledged. Another text came through. "Catherine, this is important. Answer your phone." Then another. "You're embarrassing me. People saw you leave." I turned my phone to silent and put it back in my purse. Let him be embarrassed. Let his perfect presentation fall apart without me there to fix it. I walked to the parking garage, my legs feeling stronger with each step. When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. Then, finally, I let myself cry. I cried for the 32 years I'd spent building someone else's dream. For the sacrifices I'd made that no one remembered. For the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Richard Coleman. The woman who'd had her own ambitions before she'd put them aside to support his. I cried because I'd known somewhere deep down that something was wrong. But I'd been too afraid to look directly at it. My phone kept buzzing. Texts from Richard, then calls, then texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably people from the company trying to reach me on his behalf. I didn't answer any of them. After a while, the tears stopped. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My makeup was ruined, black streaks of mascara down my cheeks. But my eyes looked different, clearer. I started the car and drove home in silence. Our house was dark when I arrived. Richard wouldn't be home for hours. There was always an after party for these events. I walked through the rooms, turning on lights, seeing everything with new eyes. The photos on the mantle, Richard receiving awards, Richard with business partners, Richard at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. In a few of the older photos, I was there too, smiling beside him. But in recent years, I'd disappeared from the frames. I disappeared from his life, and I hadn't even noticed. I went to his study, the room he kept locked when he was home. But I had a key. I'd always had a key, from the early days when we'd shared everything. Inside, his desk was immaculate. Expensive leather chair, dual monitors, everything organized with the precision he demanded from his employees. I opened his laptop. It wasn't password protected. He'd always trusted me not to snoop. The irony of that made me laugh. A bitter sound in the empty room. His email was open. I scrolled through recent messages, my heart pounding. There. An email thread with Victoria. The subject line was Madison Merger Strategy, but the content was anything but professional. "Can't wait for tonight. After the dinner, we'll celebrate properly. I've booked the suite. You looked beautiful this morning. I couldn't focus during the meeting. Tell Catherine whatever you need to. She doesn't pay attention anyway." I scrolled further back. Months of messages, plans for secret meetings, hotel reservations, intimate messages that made my skin crawl because they echoed things he used to say to me. There was more. A folder labeled personal that contained financial documents. Consultation notes from a divorce attorney dated 3 months ago. A draft post-nuptial agreement that would give me almost nothing. He'd been planning this, planning to leave me, but only after the Madison merger closed. Only after he'd secured his wealth and figured out how to keep most of it. I sat back in his chair, my hands cold. 32 years, 3 children we'd raised together, a company I'd helped him build. And he was going to discard me like I'd never mattered. But then I found something else. A file labeled Company Founding Documents. I opened it, my hands shaking. There, in the original partnership agreement from 1993, was my name. Catherine Ann Coleman, listed as co-founder. The initial investment of $50,000 had come from my mother's house. The house I'd inherited and refinanced. According to this document, I owned 30% of Coleman Analytics. I'd forgotten about this. Years ago, Richard had told me the company structure had changed, that my shares had been dissolved when we incorporated. He'd had me sign papers, told me it was just a formality, that it didn't matter because we were married. What was his was mine. But I'd never checked. I trusted him. I took photos of everything with my phone. The emails, the financial documents, the founding agreement. My hands were steady now. The front door opened. I heard Richard's footsteps in the hall, heavy and angry. "Catherine!" he shouted. "Where the hell were you? Do you have any idea what you did to me tonight?" I saved the documents to a cloud drive and closed the laptop. Then I walked out of his study and stood in the hallway. He was standing in the foyer, his tie loosened, his face red. Victoria was with him, her arm linked through his, looking around our home with undisguised interest. He'd brought her here, to our house. "Well?" Richard demanded. "What do you have to say for yourself?" I looked at him, then at her, then back at him. "I guess I don't count," I said quietly. And I walked upstairs to our bedroom and locked the door. Behind the locked door, I could hear Richard shouting. His voice carried up the stairs, angry and entitled. "Catherine, don't be childish. Open this door. We need to talk about tonight." I didn't respond. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed we'd shared for over 3 decades, and I felt nothing. No panic, no fear. Just a strange, cold clarity. Victoria's voice drifted up too, softer but audible. "Richard, maybe we should go. This seems like a private matter." "This is my house," Richard snapped at her. "She's my wife. She doesn't get to humiliate me and then hide." His wife, not his partner. Not the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. Just his wife, like a possession he'd misplaced. I looked around the bedroom. Everything was tasteful, expensive, coordinated. We'd hired an interior designer 5 years ago, someone Victoria had recommended, actually. The room looked like a hotel suite, beautiful and impersonal. When had I stopped feeling at home here? I pulled out my phone and began forwarding the photos I'd taken to my personal email. Then I created a new folder in my cloud storage and backed everything up again. I'd learned from watching Richard all these years. Documentation was everything. Downstairs, Victoria was still talking, her voice soothing and reasonable. "Let her cool off. She's probably just tired. You know how emotional women get at these events." I almost laughed at that. Emotional. As if I were the irrational one, when my husband had brought his mistress into our home. My phone buzzed. A text from our daughter, Jessica. "Mom, Dad said you left the dinner early? Are you okay?" I stared at the message. Jessica was 30 years old, living in Boston with her husband and 2 kids. What would I tell her? That her father was having an affair? That he'd been planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing? I typed back, "I'm fine, honey, just wasn't feeling well. We'll talk soon." Another buzz. Our son Michael this time. "What's going on?" Dad's blowing up the family chat saying, "You embarrassed him." I opened the family group chat. Sure enough, Richard had sent a long message about how I'd left the most important event of his career without explanation, how I'd undermined him in front of his investors and employees, how I needed to get my emotions under control. Our youngest, Amy, had responded with a confused emoji. I closed the chat without responding. The shouting downstairs had stopped. I heard the front door close, then Richard's heavy footsteps on the stairs. He tried the bedroom door handle, found it locked, and knocked hard. "Catherine, this is ridiculous. Open the door." I didn't move. "I know you're upset about the seating arrangement. That was Victoria's mistake, not mine. She's new to planning these events. I'll talk to her about it." A mistake. Of course he'd blame her, protect himself. "And you embarrassed me by leaving," he continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The Madison people noticed. They asked if there was a problem. Do you understand what you could have cost me?" What I could have cost him. I stood up and walked to the door, my hand resting on the handle. "I know about Victoria," I said, my voice calm and clear. Silence. "I know about the affair, I know about the divorce attorney, I know about all of it." More silence. Then quietly, "Catherine, let me in. We need to talk about this properly." "No, don't be childish." "I'm not being childish, Richard. I'm being smart. For the first time in 32 years, I'm protecting myself instead of protecting you." I heard him lean against the door. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. The tone he used when he was trying to manipulate someone into doing what he wanted. Catherine, you're misunderstanding the situation. Victoria and I have a professional relationship. If you saw something that made you uncomfortable, we can discuss it. But you're jumping to conclusions. I read your emails. The silence stretched longer this time. You went through my computer? His voice was sharp again, angry. That's a violation of my privacy. Those are confidential business communications. Business communications, I repeated. Is that what you call telling your mistress that she looked beautiful and you couldn't wait to celebrate with her in the hotel suite you booked? You had no right. I had every right. I'm your wife. I'm also, according to the founding documents I found, a 30% owner of Coleman Analytics. I heard his sharp intake of breath. That agreement was superseded years ago, he said quickly. You signed papers. Papers you told me were just formalities. Papers you never explained properly. I'm going to have a lawyer look at them, Richard. A lawyer who works for me, not for you. Catherine, you're not thinking clearly. You're emotional. If you'd just open the door, we could talk about this like adults. I am thinking clearly. More clearly than I have in years. And I'm done talking for tonight. I walked away from the door and went into the master bathroom, locking that door too. I turned on the shower and let the sound of the water drown out his continued protests. When I finally came out, wrapped in a robe, the house was silent. I opened the bedroom door cautiously. The hallway was empty. I went back downstairs to his study. The laptop was gone. Of course he'd taken it, but I had my photos, my documentation. He couldn't erase what I'd already saved. On his desk, he'd left a note written in his sharp, aggressive handwriting. We'll discuss this tomorrow when you're calm. Don't do anything stupid. Remember, everything we have is because of the work I've done. Don't forget that. I picked up the note and tore it into small pieces. Everything we had was because of the work he'd done. I'd been the one who'd believed in him when no one else did. I'd been the one who'd taken the financial risk. I'd been the one who'd raised our children while he built his empire, who'd maintained the client relationships, who'd kept his home running smoothly so he could focus on his ambitions. I'd been invisible, but I hadn't been useless. I went back upstairs, climbed into bed, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly. When I woke the next morning, Richard was already gone. A text message on my phone said he'd gone into the office early and would be home late. Think about what you're doing, the message ended. Don't make decisions you'll regret. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the garden I'd planted and maintained for 30 years. The roses were blooming. I'd always loved those roses. Then I picked up my phone and searched for divorce attorneys. I found one with excellent reviews, a woman named Patricia Warren who specialized in high net worth divorces and business asset division. Her website said she offered free initial consultations. I called and made an appointment for that afternoon. Then I called my friend Susan, someone I'd known since college, before I'd become Mrs. Richard Coleman. We'd fallen out of touch over the years. Richard had never liked her, said she was too opinionated, but I knew she'd help me. Catherine? Susan answered on the second ring. Oh my God, I haven't heard from you in forever. How are you? I need a favor, I said. Can I stay with you for a few days? There was a pause. Then, of course, what's wrong? Everything, I said. Everything is wrong, but I'm going to fix it. I packed a bag with clothes and important documents. My passport, birth certificate, financial records I'd kept in my own files. I took photos of every room in the house, every valuable item, creating a record of our marital assets. Then I loaded my suitcase into my car and drove away from the house I'd called home for 3 decades. I didn't look back. Susan's apartment was small and cluttered, the complete opposite of my sterile designer home. Books everywhere, mismatched furniture, a cat named Prometheus who immediately claimed my lap. It felt more like home than my house had in years. Tell me everything, Susan said, handing me a cup of tea and settling into the armchair across from me. So I did. I told her about the awards dinner, about Victoria, about the emails and the divorce attorney documents. Susan listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she leaned forward. What do you want to do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to pretend I never saw any of it. Go home, play the good wife, keep everything stable. And the other part? The other part wants to burn his entire world down. Susan smiled grimly. Good. That's the part you need to listen to. My phone had been ringing all morning. Richard, Jessica, Michael, Amy. I'd ignored all of them. Finally, I sent a group text to my children. I'm fine. Your father and I are having some difficulties, but this is between us. I love you all. Please give me some space. Richard's messages were different. They'd started angry, then shifted to concerned, then back to angry. The most recent one said, "You're being irrational. Come home so we can discuss this like adults. You're making things worse for yourself." Making things worse for myself. As if I were the problem. Patricia Warren's office was in a sleek downtown building. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an air of complete competence. I liked her immediately. "Tell me why you're here," she said, after we'd settled in her office. I showed her everything. The photos of the emails, the divorce consultation documents Richard had prepared, the founding agreement for Coleman Analytics. She studied each document carefully, occasionally making notes. When she finished, she looked at me with something like respect. "You did well to document everything," she said. "Many women in your position wait too long, and their husbands have time to hide assets or create false narratives. What are my options? That depends on what you want. If you want to preserve the marriage, counseling might—" "I don't want to preserve the marriage," I said firmly. "I want out. But I want what's fair." Patricia nodded. "Then we need to establish several things. First, your ownership stake in the company. This founding document is interesting, but you say you signed papers later?" "Yes, but I don't have copies." Richard handled all of that. He told me it was just restructuring for tax purposes. "We'll subpoena those documents. Second, we need to inventory all marital assets, real estate, investments, retirement accounts. Third, we need to establish the timeline of the affair, and because infidelity can be relevant in divorce proceedings, especially if marital assets were used to support the relationship." My head was spinning. "How long will this take?" "That depends on how cooperative your husband is. But Catherine, I need you to understand something. Men like your husband don't go quietly. He's going to fight you. He's going to try to make you feel guilty, to convince you that you're being unreasonable. He'll use your children, your friends, your reputation. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about sitting at that table by the kitchen, invisible and dismissed. I thought about Victoria's smirk. I thought about 32 years of being erased. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Patricia asked detailed questions about our finances, our assets, our marriage. Some of it I knew. Much of it I didn't. Richard had always handled the money, said I didn't need to worry about such things. "That's going to make this harder," Patricia admitted, "but not impossible. We'll file discovery motions, demand full financial disclosure. He can't hide everything." When I left her office, I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. This was really happening. I was really leaving my husband. My phone rang again. This time it was Jessica, and I decided to answer. "Mom, finally, what is going on? Dad said you left him, that you're staying with some friend and won't talk to anyone." "I needed some space," I said carefully. "Your father and I are having problems. He said you're being irrational, that you got upset about something at the dinner, and now you're blowing everything out of proportion." Of course, that's what he'd told her. The rational, successful CEO and his overly emotional, unstable wife. "Jessica, did your father mention that he's having an affair?" Silence. "Mom, that's a serious accusation. Are you sure? Dad said you've been stressed lately, that maybe you're going through something." I read the emails, Jessica. Between him and his assistant, I saw the hotel receipts, the jewelry purchases. I found his divorce attorney consultation notes. "Oh my God." Jessica's voice was small. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. He's very good at hiding things. He's had a lot of practice." "What are you going to do?" "I'm filing for divorce." Another silence, longer this time. And then, do you need anything? Money, a place to stay, anything? I'm okay for now, but Jessica, your father's going to try to turn you kids against me. He's going to paint me as the villain. I need you to remember that I love you, and I would never do anything to hurt you. I know that, Mom. And I'm on your side, always. After we hung up, I felt lighter. At least one of my children believed me. I spent the next few days at Susan's apartment, avoiding Richard's calls and messages. Patricia was working on filing the divorce petition and preparing discovery requests. I tried to stay busy, but mostly I felt numb. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Coleman, this is Diana Flores. I work at Coleman Analytics. I need to talk to you. My heart started racing. About what? About Victoria. And your husband. I know things I think you should know. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town, somewhere Richard would never go. Diana turned out to be a woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, with worried eyes. I don't know if I should be doing this, she said, stirring her coffee nervously. But I can't stay quiet anymore. It's not right what's happening. What do you know? Diana took a deep breath. I've worked at Coleman Analytics for 8 years. I've seen Victoria manipulate her way up. She started as an intern, and now she's your husband's right hand. But it's not because she's qualified. It's because she's sleeping with him. I know about the affair, I said gently. It's not just that. She's been poisoning people against you, telling people you're unstable, that you're jealous of her success, that you've been trying to undermine the company. She's been positioning herself as the real partner in Richard's life, professionally and personally. My chest tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because you helped me once. 3 years ago, I was having problems with a client, and you stepped in. You smoothed things over, probably saved my job. You probably don't even remember, but I do. And I hate watching what they're doing to you. I did remember, actually. Diana had been close to tears in the break room, panicking about a client complaint. I'd made some calls, fixed the situation, never mentioned it to anyone. Is there anything else? Diana hesitated. Victoria has been copying your work, projects you developed, client strategies you created. She's been presenting them as her own. Richard knows, and he lets her do it. He's been systematically erasing your contributions to the company. Do you have proof? Some. Email chains, project files with metadata showing you created them. I can get you copies if you want, but it has to be quiet. If Richard finds out I'm helping you, I'll lose my job. I understand. And Diana, thank you. This means more than you know. She slid a USB drive across the table. This is what I have so far. I'll get you more if I can. After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time, staring at the USB drive. More evidence, more proof that my husband had been systematically erasing me from his life while using my work to build his success. That evening, I met with Patricia and showed her what Diana had given me. This is excellent, Patricia said, scrolling through the files on her laptop. This shows a pattern of deception and theft of intellectual property. If you have an ownership stake in the company, this strengthens your position significantly. What happens next? We file the divorce petition. We demand full financial disclosure. We prepare for him to fight back. Patricia looked at me seriously. Catherine, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we file, there's no going back quietly. I thought about Victoria standing on that stage next to my husband. I thought about the emails, the lies, the decades of being invisible. I'm certain. Then we move forward. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on Susan's couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I was about to lose. My home, my identity as Mrs. Richard Coleman, the stability I'd built my entire adult life around. But I was also thinking about what I might gain, my dignity, my self-respect, a life where I wasn't invisible. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. This has gone on long enough. Come home. We'll forget this ever happened. I forgive you for overreacting. He forgave me. I typed back, you'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow. My attorney will be in touch regarding asset disclosure. Then I blocked his number. The next morning, Patricia filed the divorce petition. By noon, Richard had been officially served at his office. By 1 p.m., my phone was exploding with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. I'd changed my settings to only accept calls from contacts, but the voicemails piled up. Richard's lawyer, business associates, even Victoria, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mrs. Coleman, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Richard is devastated. If you just talk to him, I'm sure we could clear this all up." I deleted the message without finishing it. Michael called that evening. "Mom, Dad's saying you're trying to destroy him, that you're demanding half of everything he's built. Is that true?" "I'm demanding what's legally mine, Michael. There's a difference. He said you're doing this because you're jealous of his success, that you've always resented him. Did he mention that he's been having an affair with his assistant? That he's been planning to divorce me while hiding assets? That he's been erasing my contributions to the company we built together? He says you're lying about all of that. I have proof, Michael. Emails, documents, witnesses. Your father is not the man you think he is. I don't know what to believe." "Then don't believe anyone yet. Wait and see what comes out in the divorce proceedings. The truth will speak for itself." After Michael hung up, I felt the weight of it all. Richard was doing exactly what Patricia had predicted, turning people against me, painting me as the irrational, vindictive wife. But I had the truth on my side, and I had evidence. Susan found me crying in the bathroom that night. She didn't say anything and just held me while I sobbed. "I gave him everything," I choked out. 32 years, and he's making me the villain. "He's scared," Susan said. "Men like Richard only attack when they're cornered. You're not the villain, Catherine. You're the hero of your own story. You just forgot that for a while." The next few weeks were brutal. Richard's lawyer filed counter motions, demanding that I pay him spousal support, claiming I'd abandoned the marriage. They painted me as unstable, irrational, and vindictive. But Patricia was relentless. She demanded financial records. She deposed Victoria, who crumbled under questioning and admitted to the affair. She subpoenaed the company's founding documents and discovered that Richard had never properly dissolved my ownership stake. He'd forged my signature on the restructuring papers. "He committed fraud," Patricia told me, her eyes gleaming. "We have him." Richard tried to settle. His lawyer called with offers. The house, a lump sum payment, his silence about my mental health issues, if I'd just go away quietly. "No," I told Patricia. "I want my fair share of the company. I want my name restored to the founding documents. And I want everyone to know the truth." "It's going to get uglier," Patricia warned. "Let it." Richard escalated. He told our children I was mentally unstable and needed intervention. He told business associates I was trying to sabotage the Madison merger. He convinced Amy, our youngest, that I was destroying the family out of spite. But Jessica and Michael stood by me. Diana and 3 other employees came forward with statements about Victoria's manipulation and Richard's pattern of taking credit for others' work. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The Madison merger fell through. The investors got nervous about the personal drama and pulled out. Richard's company stock dropped 15% in 1 week. He sent me an email, bypassing my blocks through a business account. "Look what you've done. Are you happy now? You've destroyed everything I built." I wrote back, "Everything we built. And you destroyed it yourself the moment you decided I didn't count." The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I arrived at Patricia's office an hour early, my stomach in knots. "Remember?" Patricia coached me. "Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. Don't let Richard's attorney provoke you. Stay calm, stay factual." "I can do this," I said, trying to convince myself. Richard's attorney was a man named Gerald Hutchins, with silver hair and an expensive suit that probably cost more than my car. He had a reputation for being ruthless in divorce cases, for breaking down opposing parties until they crumbled. The deposition room was cold and formal. Richard sat across from me, looking tired but defiant. Victoria wasn't there. She'd already been deposed separately, but I could feel her presence in the way Richard kept checking his phone. Hutchins started with basic questions about our marriage, our finances, our daily life. I answered each one carefully, aware that everything was being recorded. Then he shifted tactics. Mrs. Coleman, isn't it true that you've suffered from depression in the past? I felt Patricia tense beside me. I experienced postpartum depression after my daughter was born 30 years ago. I received treatment and recovered fully. And anxiety? Haven't you been prescribed anti-anxiety medication? Briefly, yes. After my mother died 5 years ago. Again, I received treatment and no longer need medication. Hutchins smiled like a shark. So you have a history of mental health issues that affect your judgment? Objection, Patricia said sharply. That's not what she said, and you know it. I'll rephrase. Mrs. Coleman, is it possible that your accusations against my client are the result of paranoia or irrational thinking caused by mental instability? I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice steady. No. My accusations are based on documented evidence, emails, financial records, and witness testimony. Witness testimony from employees who might have their own grudges against Mr. Coleman. Witness testimony from people who saw what was happening and chose to tell the truth. Hutchins leaned forward. Mrs. Coleman, isn't it true that you've always been jealous of your husband's success? No. That you resented his professional achievements? No. That you felt threatened by younger, more accomplished women in his workplace? I felt anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. I felt threatened when I discovered my husband was having an affair with his assistant and planning to divorce me while hiding assets. That's not jealousy. That's a reasonable response to betrayal. The deposition continued for 4 hours. Hutchins tried every angle, painting me as unstable, vindictive, greedy. But I didn't break. Every time he made an accusation, I calmly referred to documented evidence. When it was finally over, Patricia squeezed my shoulder. You did excellently. You didn't give him anything he could use. But I felt hollowed out, exhausted. Defending my sanity to strangers while my husband sat silently by was degrading in ways I hadn't anticipated. That evening, I met Jessica for dinner. She'd been my rock through all of this, calling regularly, visiting when she could. You look tired, Mom, she said, worry in her eyes. The deposition was today. How bad was it? They tried to paint me as crazy, jealous, unstable, all of it. Jessica's jaw tightened. That's Dad's strategy? To say you're crazy? Apparently. Mom, I know I don't say this enough, but I'm proud of you. You could have stayed quiet, let him do whatever he wanted, but you're fighting. That takes courage. I felt tears prick my eyes. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it, if I should just take whatever settlement he offers and disappear. Is that what you want? I thought about that awards dinner, about sitting at the back table, about 32 years of being invisible. No, I said. I want justice. I want acknowledgement. I want my name back on the company I helped build. Then keep fighting. The next morning, Patricia called with news. The forensic accountant's report is back. Catherine, you need to see this. I went to her office immediately. She spread a thick document across her desk, pages covered in numbers and highlighted sections. Your husband has been systematically hiding money for at least 3 years. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, falsified business expenses. We're talking about millions of dollars that should be marital. Assets. My hands shook as I looked at the numbers. 3 years? He's been planning this that long? It appears so. And there's more. Remember how you said Victoria got promoted quickly? We found evidence that company funds were used to pay for her apartment, her car, even her credit cards. All disguised as business expenses. Can we prove it? The accountant is confident. And with this level of fraud, we can argue for a larger settlement. He won't just owe you half of the visible assets. He'll owe you compensation for what he tried to hide. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt sick. My husband hadn't just had an affair. He'd been stealing from our marriage, planning my erasure for years. There's something else, Patricia said carefully. We've been digging into the company's founding documents. Catherine, your original investment of $50,000 in 1993, adjusted for the company's growth and your ownership stake, your shares are worth approximately $12 million today. The room spun. $12 million? That's a conservative estimate, and Richard has been benefiting from that ownership while telling you it didn't exist. It's not just fraud, Catherine. It could be criminal. I sat down heavily. What do? We file an amended petition demanding your ownership stake be recognized and valued properly. We expose the financial fraud, and we let a judge decide what happens next. Over the next week, Patricia filed the amended documents. The local business journal picked up the story. Tech CEO accused of fraud in divorce filing. I tried not to read the comments online, but I couldn't help myself. Some people supported me, many didn't. Gold digger trying to destroy a successful man? Classic bitter ex-wife syndrome. She's just jealous he upgraded to a younger model. But there were other voices too. If she helped found the company, she deserves her share. The emails sound pretty damning. Why do powerful men always think they can get away with this? Richard's professional reputation began to crack. 2 board members resigned. 3 clients moved their accounts elsewhere. The company's stock continued to drop. And then Richard did something desperate. He called a press conference. I watched it live on Susan's laptop, my heart pounding. Richard stood in front of the Coleman Analytics building, looking exhausted but determined. I want to address the rumors and accusations that have been circulating, he said. My wife is suffering from mental health issues that have caused her to make false accusations. I love her deeply, and I want her to get the help she needs. This divorce filing is the result of her instability, not any wrongdoing on my part. I felt like I'd been slapped. He's lying, Susan said, furious. Everyone can see he's lying, but not everyone could. The reporters asked questions about my mental health history, about whether I'd been in treatment. Richard answered with careful phrasing that made me sound unstable without technically saying anything actionable. My phone exploded. Friends I hadn't heard from in years, calling to check on me. Reporters requesting interviews. Even Amy called, crying. Mom, is it true? Are you sick? Dad said you need help. Amy, I'm not sick. Your father is lying to protect himself. But he seemed so genuine. He said he still loves you, that he wants you to get better. He wants me to look crazy so no one believes what I'm saying about the affair and the fraud. Don't fall for it. But I could hear the doubt in her voice. Richard had always been good at manipulation. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He'd called me mentally unstable on television. He'd made our private life public, weaponized my past struggles with depression. How was I supposed to come back from that? Patricia called early the next morning. Don't panic. This can work in our favor. How? He just told the world I'm crazy. He also made specific claims about your mental state. We can demand his evidence. We can have you evaluated by an independent psychiatrist. And when they find you're perfectly stable, his credibility crumbles. You really think that will work? I know it will. Catherine, desperate people make mistakes. Richard just made a big one. Over the next 2 weeks, I underwent psychiatric evaluation. It was humiliating, answering personal questions, talking about my past, all to prove I wasn't the unstable woman my husband claimed I was. But the psychiatrist's report was clear. Mrs. Coleman shows no signs of mental instability, delusion, or impaired judgment. Her responses are rational, her affect appropriate, her cognition intact. Previous treatment for postpartum depression and grief-related anxiety were appropriate and successful. There is no evidence supporting claims of ongoing mental health issues. Patricia filed the report with the court, along with a motion demanding Richard provide evidence for his public claims or issue a retraction. Richard's lawyer tried to argue that Richard's statements were protected opinion, but Patricia argued they were specific factual claims made to damage my credibility in ongoing litigation. The judge agreed. He ordered Richard to either provide medical evidence of my instability or issue a public apology and retraction within 1 week. Richard chose to retract. Sort of. I may have overstated my concerns about my wife's mental health, he said in a brief statement released through his lawyer. I was emotional and worried about our family. I apologize for any misunderstanding. It wasn't much, but it was something. And the media picked up on the forced retraction. the implication that he'd been lying. The tide began to turn more definitively. A business magazine ran a profile on me, the woman behind Coleman Analytics, how Catherine Coleman's contributions were erased. Diana and other employees were interviewed, describing how I'd been the silent architect of many of the company's early strategies. A feminist blog picked up the story. Another powerful man tries to erase his wife. This time, she's fighting back. Even some of Richard's business associates began to distance themselves publicly. Nobody wanted to be associated with a man who'd committed fraud and publicly attacked his wife's mental health. But the ugliness wasn't over. One evening, I returned to Susan's apartment to find my car vandalized. Someone had keyed "gold digger" into the paint and slashed 2 tires. I called the police. They took a report but said without security footage, there was little they could do. "Do you think Richard did this?" Susan asked, horrified. "Not personally, but I wouldn't be surprised if Victoria or one of his loyalists did." "This is getting dangerous, Catherine." "I know, but I'm not backing down." Patricia recommended I hire security. Just for a while until things calm down. I've seen cases like this escalate. So I did. A bodyguard named Marcus started accompanying me to meetings and depositions. It felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away. That's when the judge would review the evidence and make initial rulings about asset division and the ownership dispute. "That's when this gets decided," Patricia explained. "If the judge rules in your favor on the ownership stake, Richard will have to negotiate seriously. If he rules against you, we'll have a much harder fight." Those 6 weeks crawled by. Richard's lawyer filed motion after motion, trying to delay, to confuse the issues, to overwhelm us with paperwork. But Patricia was relentless. She countered every motion, produced every document, built an ironclad case. Michael called one evening. "Mom, I talked to Dad's accountant, off the record. He said Dad's been panicking, moving money around, trying to protect assets. He asked me to talk to you, to get you to settle." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you deserved everything you were asking for, and that Dad should have thought about consequences before he decided to cheat and steal." I felt a surge of love for my son. "Thank you, Michael. I'm sorry I doubted you at first. I should have known Dad was lying. He's very convincing. He's had a lot of practice." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in Susan's guest room, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The 32 years of marriage, the 3 children, the company we'd built. All of it coming down to a judge's decision about whether I mattered. Jessica called. "Mom, I know you're probably not sleeping. I just wanted to say that whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. You stood up for yourself. That takes more courage than most people ever have to show." "What if I lose?" "You won't. But even if the legal system fails you, you've already won. You proved you're not invisible. You proved you count." The hearing was held in a sterile courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. Richard sat on one side with Hutchins. I sat on the other with Patricia. The judge, a woman in her 60s, named Sandra Reeves, reviewed the documents with a neutral expression. Patricia presented our case methodically. The founding documents showing my ownership stake, the forged signatures on the restructuring papers, the forensic accountant's report on hidden assets, the emails showing the affair and the plans to divorce me while minimizing my settlement, testimony from Diana and other employees about my contributions to the company. It took 3 hours. By the end, the judge's expression had shifted from neutral to distinctly unimpressed with Richard. Hutchins tried to counter. He argued that the founding documents were outdated, that I'd willingly signed away my stake, that the forensic accountant's report was speculative. He tried to paint me as a scorned wife seeking revenge, not justice. But his arguments sounded hollow after Patricia's presentation. When both sides finished, Judge Reeves sat back in her chair. "I'll be honest with you both," she said. "This is one of the more egregious cases of marital fraud I've seen. Mr. Coleman, You forged your wife's signature on legal documents. You hid millions of dollars in assets. You used marital funds to support an extramarital affair. And then you publicly attacked your wife's mental health when she dared to stand up for herself. Richard's face paled. Mrs. Coleman, I'm granting a preliminary ruling in your favor. Your 30% ownership stake in Coleman Analytics is hereby recognized. Mr. Coleman, you will provide complete financial disclosure within 30 days, including all offshore accounts and hidden assets. A monitor will be appointed to ensure compliance. We'll reconvene in 60 days for final asset division. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. Furthermore, Judge Reeves continued, Mr. Coleman, if I find evidence of continued financial manipulation or attempts to intimidate your wife, I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Richard said, his voice barely audible. We left the courtroom in stunned silence. On the steps outside, Patricia finally allowed herself to smile. We won, she said. The hard part is over. But as I looked back at the courthouse, I saw Richard standing with Hutchins, his face twisted with rage. Victoria was there too, her hand on his arm. The hard part wasn't over. It was just beginning. The court victory should have made things easier. Instead, it made Richard desperate. The financial monitor appointed by the court, a forensic accountant named Robert Chen, began his work immediately. Within days, he'd uncovered 3 more offshore accounts Richard had failed to disclose. This is serious, Patricia told me during one of our regular update calls. Deliberately hiding assets from court-ordered disclosure can result in criminal charges, not just civil penalties. Will he face charges? That depends on whether the prosecutor thinks there's enough evidence. But at minimum, it strengthens our position dramatically. Judges don't take kindly to people who violate their orders. Richard knew he was cornered, and cornered animals bite. It started with phone calls. Richard would call Jessica late at night, drunk and rambling about how I destroyed him. He'd call Michael during work hours, demanding he talk sense into me. He even called Amy's husband, trying to turn him against me. Your mother-in-law is mentally unstable, I heard through Amy's tearful retelling. She's having some kind of breakdown and trying to destroy your family's stability. Someone needs to intervene. Mom, I don't believe him, Amy assured me. But he's scaring me. He sounds unhinged. Then the smear campaign escalated. Anonymous posts started appearing on social media and business forums, claiming I was vindictive, gold-digging, that I'd never contributed anything to the company, and was trying to steal what Richard had built. Patricia hired a cybersecurity expert who traced several of the posts back to IP addresses associated with Coleman Analytics, specifically to Victoria's computer. We can add harassment to the case, Patricia said. This is textbook intimidation. But before we could file anything, Richard made his biggest mistake. He tried to sell the company. Robert Chen discovered it during a routine audit. Richard had quietly begun negotiations to sell Coleman Analytics to a larger tech firm. If the sale went through before the divorce was finalized, the company's value would be absorbed into a complex deal structure that could take years to untangle and would significantly reduce my settlement. He's trying to hide your assets in plain sight, Patricia explained. If the company is sold and the money dispersed through various channels, proving what portion belongs to you becomes much harder. Can he do that? Not legally, no. You're a recognized owner now. Any sale requires your approval. But if he's desperate enough, he might try to push it through anyway and deal with the legal consequences later. What do we do? Patricia smiled grimly. We set a trap. The plan was simple but risky. We'd let Richard think we didn't know about the sale. Meanwhile, Patricia would prepare an emergency injunction to stop the transaction at the last possible moment, maximizing the damage to Richard's reputation and negotiating position. He'll be furious, Patricia warned. This could make him even more unpredictable. I don't care. I'm tired of playing defense. While we waited, I tried to build some semblance of a normal life. I'd been living with Susan for 3 months, and while she never complained, I knew I needed my own space. I found a small apartment across town. Nothing like the house I'd left, but enough for me. Moving in felt like both a loss and a liberation. I was really doing this, building a life without Richard. Jessica helped me unpack. This place is nice, Mom. Cozy. It's tiny, I said, looking around the modest living room. It's yours. That makes it perfect. Michael came by the next day with a housewarming gift, a framed photo of the 3 kids when they were young. I thought you might want this. Dad removed all the family photos from the house, replaced them with corporate awards. I stared at the photo, my children's young faces smiling up at me. Of course he did. Mom, I need to tell you something. Dad called me yesterday. He offered me money to testify that you've always been unstable, that you've needed psychiatric care for years. My stomach dropped. What did you say? I told him to go to hell, but Mom, he's really losing it. He's making threats, talking about destroying you completely. I'm worried about what he might do. I have security now. I'm being careful. That's not enough. He knows where you live, where you work, everything. Maybe you should consider a restraining order. Patricia agreed when I told her. We filed for a protective order, citing the harassment, the vandalism, and Richard's increasingly erratic behavior. The hearing for the restraining order was brief. Richard showed up in a perfectly tailored suit, playing the role of reasonable, concerned husband. He denied everything, claimed I was paranoid and vindictive. But we had evidence. Screenshots of the online post traced to Victoria's computer. Testimony from Michael about the bribery attempt. Records of the late-night drunk calls to Jessica. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. Richard had to stay at least 100 yards away from me at all times. As we left the courthouse, Richard grabbed Hutchins' arm and said something I couldn't hear, but the look on his face was pure hatred. That wasn't smart, Marcus, my bodyguard muttered. He's going to escalate. Marcus was right. 2 days later, I received a package at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a folder filled with photos, pictures of me from the past few weeks. Getting coffee, walking to my car, entering Patricia's office. Someone had been following me. There was a note. You should be more careful. Accidents happen. I called Patricia immediately. She called the police. They took a report, added it to the restraining order file, but said without proof of who sent it, there was little they could do. It's Richard, I told the detective. Or someone working for him. Probably, but we need evidence. Do you have security cameras at your apartment? I didn't. I had them installed the next day. The stress was wearing on me. I wasn't sleeping well. I'd lost weight. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Every time I left my apartment, I looked over my shoulder. Susan noticed. Maybe you should take a break from all this. Go somewhere for a few days. Clear your head. I can't. The sale injunction hearing is next week. After that, then. Promise me. I promise. The hearing approached. Patricia had everything ready. The evidence of Richard's attempted sale. The proof that he'd violated court orders. The documentation of all his manipulations. This is it, she told me the night before. Tomorrow, we end this. Either Richard settles on our terms, or we go to trial and he loses everything. I barely slept. At dawn, I gave up and made coffee, watching the sun rise over the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably awake too, planning his next move. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread that this hearing would be dramatic. Business reporters filled the gallery. Some of Richard's colleagues were there, probably to watch him fall. Judge Reeves called the hearing to order. Patricia stood and presented our evidence of the attempted sale. Your Honor, Mr. Coleman has been negotiating to sell Coleman Analytics in direct violation of the preliminary ruling recognizing Mrs. Coleman's ownership stake. This sale was designed to hide assets and deprive Mrs. Coleman of what is legally hers. Hutchins tried to argue that Richard had a right to make business decisions, that the sale was in the company's best interest. But Judge Reeves wasn't having it. Mr. Coleman, this court explicitly ruled that your wife owns 30% of this company. You cannot unilaterally sell what is partially hers. Did you genuinely believe you could do this without consequences? Richard stood. Your Honor, with respect, the company is suffering because of these proceedings. The sale was necessary to preserve value. The company is suffering because of your choices, Mr. Coleman. Your affair, your fraud, your public attacks on your wife. Don't blame her for consequences you created. I watched Richard's face turn red. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way, wasn't used to being held accountable. Furthermore, Judge Reeves continued, I've reviewed the evidence of harassment, intimidation, and threats. Mr. Coleman, I'm extending the protective order for 12 months. Additionally, I'm freezing all assets related to Coleman Analytics pending final settlement. You will not sell, transfer, or encumber any company property without this court's explicit approval. Hutchins tried to object, but Judge Reeves cut him off. I'm not finished. Mr. Coleman, you have 30 days to present a settlement offer that fairly compensates your wife for her ownership stake and the assets you attempted to hide. If you fail to do so, or if the offer is unreasonable, we will proceed to trial. And I promise you, Mr. Coleman, you will not like the outcome of a trial. The gavel came down. It was over. In the hallway outside, reporters swarmed. I didn't say anything, just let Patricia handle the questions. But I saw Richard across the crowd, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. He'd lost control. The company was frozen. His assets were monitored. His reputation was destroyed. And it was all his own doing. That evening, my phone rang. An unknown number, but I answered. Catherine. It was Victoria. She sounded tired. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to say to you. Please, just 5 minutes. Meet me somewhere public. I have information you need. Every instinct said to hang up. But curiosity won. Where? We met at a busy cafe downtown. Victoria looked different, less polished, more anxious. She sat across from me, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Thank you for coming, she said. What do you want? To warn you, Richard is planning something. I don't know exactly what, but he's been having private meetings with people who scare me. Why are you telling me this? Victoria looked down. Because I've realized what I've become. I destroyed a marriage. I helped him commit fraud. I harassed you online? And for what? He's not the man I thought he was. Now that things are falling apart, he's turned on me too. He blames me for everything, says I seduced him, that I'm the reason his life is ruined. You did seduce him? You are part of the reason his life is ruined. I know. And I deserve whatever comes to me. But you don't deserve to get hurt worse than you already have. So I'm telling you, be careful. Richard is desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. Do you have any specifics? No, just conversations that stop when I enter rooms, phone calls he takes in private, and he's been drinking heavily. He's not rational anymore. After she left, I called Patricia and Marcus. They both took Victoria's warning seriously. I'll see if we can get increased police patrols near your apartment, Patricia said. And Marcus, you don't leave her side. The next week was tense. Richard's settlement offer came in, laughably low, clearly designed to insult rather than negotiate. Patricia sent back a counter-offer that was fair but firm. $12 million for my ownership stake, based on independent valuation, half of all marital assets, a public acknowledgement of my contributions to the company's founding. Richard rejected it. We're going to trial, Patricia said. It's what I expected, but it's going to get uglier before it gets better. Trial was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the company continued to suffer. Without Richard able to make major decisions, several key projects stalled. More employees left. The stock price dropped to new lows. I should have felt victorious, watching his empire crumble. Instead, I just felt sad. This was the company I'd helped build. Seeing it suffer, even though Richard deserved every consequence he faced, was painful. Then, 4 weeks before trial, everything changed. I was leaving Patricia's office when Marcus tensed beside me. Don't move, he said quietly. Across the street, a car was parked. Inside, someone was watching us with binoculars. Marcus called the police. The car sped away before they arrived, but they traced the license plate. It was a rental, paid for with a credit card that turned out to be stolen. Someone's watching you, the detective said. Probably has been for a while. We'll increase patrols, but you need to be very careful. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally broke down. I called Jessica, crying so hard I could barely speak. Mom, what happened? I'm so tired. I can't keep doing this. I just want it to be over. Come stay with me. Come to Boston for a few days. Get away from all this. I can't. Trial's coming. I need to be here. Then I'm coming there. Jessica arrived the next day and stayed for a week. Her presence helped. We watched movies, cooked meals together, talked about her kids and her life, normal things that had nothing to do with divorce and fraud and threats. But trial was approaching, and I had to prepare. Patricia scheduled me for multiple prep sessions, going over every piece of evidence, every question I might be asked. You're going to testify, she said, and it's going to be hard. Hutchins will try to break you down, make you seem unstable or vindictive. You have to stay calm and factual no matter what he says. I can do this, I said, trying to believe it. 2 weeks before trial, Richard made one last attempt at negotiation. He called Jessica directly. Tell your mother I'll give her $8 million and the house. That's my final offer. If she doesn't take it, she'll get nothing. I'll drag this trial out for years, bankrupt her with legal fees, destroy what's left of her reputation. Jessica told me word for word. I could hear the desperation in Richard's threats. What did you say? I asked. I told him Mom doesn't negotiate with bullies, and I told him I was testifying at the trial about his bribery attempt. I hugged my daughter tight. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. He needs to face consequences, Mom. Real ones. The night before trial, I couldn't eat. I stood in my small apartment, looking at my reflection in the window. Somewhere across the city, Richard was probably awake too, preparing his own testimony. 32 years of marriage, coming down to this. A courtroom battle to prove I mattered, that my contributions counted, that I deserved basic respect and honesty. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we end this. Tomorrow, you win. I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned the hard way that nothing was certain, that men like Richard always had one more trick, one more manipulation. I just hoped I was ready for whatever came next. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in November. The courtroom was packed with reporters, business associates, and curious onlookers. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia, my hands folded to keep them from shaking. Richard sat across the aisle with Hutchins, looking polished and confident. He didn't glance at me once. Judge Reeves entered, and everyone stood. Let's begin, she said simply. Patricia started with opening statements. She laid out our case methodically. The founding documents showing my ownership, the forged signatures, the hidden assets, the affair conducted with company resources, the attempts to sell the company out from under me. Your Honor, this case is about a woman who gave 32 years of her life to building something with her husband, only to be systematically erased when she was no longer convenient. Catherine Coleman invested her own inheritance to start this company. She maintained client relationships. She developed strategies that the company still uses today. And in return, her husband committed fraud to deny her what she was legally owed. We're here to correct that injustice. Hutchins's opening was predictable. He painted Richard as a brilliant entrepreneur whose success was entirely his own doing. He claimed I was a bitter ex-wife trying to profit from work I hadn't done, that my contributions were minimal at best, that I'd lived a life of luxury funded by Richard's hard work. Mrs. Coleman wants credit for her husband's genius, Hutchins said smoothly. But typing a proposal and hosting dinner parties doesn't make you a co-founder. It makes you a supportive spouse. And support, while appreciated, isn't worth $12 million. I felt my face flush, but Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. Stay calm, she whispered. We knew they'd go there. The first witness was Robert Chen, the forensic accountant. He testified about the hidden offshore accounts, the falsified business expenses used to fund Richard's affair with Victoria, the complex shell corporations designed to hide assets. In my professional opinion, Chen said, Mr. Coleman engaged in systematic financial fraud over a period of at least 3 years, possibly longer. The evidence suggests deliberate intent to deceive both his wife and the court. Hutchins tried to shake him on cross-examination, but Chen was unflappable. The numbers didn't lie. Next came Diana Flores. She testified about working at Coleman Analytics, watching Victoria take credit for my work, seeing Richard erase my contributions from company history. Mrs. Coleman developed our entire client relationship framework, Diana said. I have emails from 15 years ago showing her strategies. But when the company rebranded 3 years ago, all of that was credited to Mr. Coleman and his team. It was like she never existed. Objection, Hutchins said. The witness is speculating about internal business decisions she wasn't privy to. Overruled, Judge Reeves said. She's testifying about what she personally observed. Continue, Ms. Flores. Diana described the toxic culture Richard and Victoria had created, the way employees who mentioned my contributions were shut down or pushed out. On cross-examination, Hutchins tried to paint Diana as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. Isn't it true you were passed over for a promotion last year? He asked. Yes. And you blame Mr. Coleman for that? No, I blame him for a lot of things, but that's not one of them. I didn't get promoted because I wasn't qualified yet, but I saw what he did to his wife, and I couldn't stay quiet about it. 2 more employees testified with similar stories. By the end of the day, the pattern was clear. Richard had systematically erased me from the company's history. That evening, Patricia and I reviewed the next day's testimony over Chinese takeout in her office. Tomorrow, Victoria testifies, Patricia said. She's been subpoenaed. She can't refuse. What do you think she'll say? The truth, probably. She's scared of perjury charges, and she knows we have evidence. But Hutchins will try to control the damage. And then I testify? Day 3. We're saving you for last. You're our best weapon. Authentic, sympathetic, and you know every detail of the case. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about Victoria, wondering what she'd say. Would she try to protect Richard? Or would she finally tell the truth? The courtroom was even more packed on day 2. Everyone wanted to see Victoria testify. She walked in looking nervous, her usual confidence gone. She wore a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup, trying to look professional and trustworthy. Patricia began the questioning gently. Ms. Harmon, how long have you worked at Coleman Analytics? 4 years. And what is your relationship with Mr. Coleman? Victoria glanced at Richard, then at the judge. We've had a romantic relationship for approximately 18 months. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Richard stared straight ahead, expressionless. Did Mr. Coleman disclose his marriage to you when the relationship began? Yes. He said he and his wife had been separated for years, that they stayed married for financial and family reasons. Was that true? Victoria looked down. No. I learned later that Mrs. Coleman had no idea the marriage was in trouble. He lied to both of us. Patricia walked Victoria through the affair. The hotel rooms paid for with company credit cards. The jewelry and apartment and car purchased with company funds. The vacation trips disguised as business travel. Ms. Harmon, did you know Mrs. Coleman was a co-founder of Coleman Analytics? Not at first. Richard told me she was just his wife, that she'd never been involved in the business. But then I found old documents that mentioned her as a partner. When I asked Richard about it, he said she'd signed away her stake years ago. Did you help Mr. Coleman hide assets from Mrs. Coleman? Victoria hesitated. I helped him set up offshore accounts for what he said were legitimate tax purposes. I didn't realize he was using them to hide money from the divorce. Did you post negative comments about Mrs. Coleman on social media and business forums? Victoria's face reddened. Yes. I was jealous and stupid. Richard kept talking about her, about how vindictive she was. I wanted to defend him, but I was wrong. I'm sorry. Patricia let that apology hang in the air. Then she asked, Ms. Harmon, has Mr. Coleman's treatment of you changed since these legal proceedings began? Yes. He's become angry and controlling. He blames me for everything that's gone wrong. He says if I'd been more careful, if I'd handled the seating at the awards dinner better, none of this would have happened. Has he threatened you? Not directly, but he's made it clear that if I don't support him in this trial, I'll lose my job, and he'll make sure I never work in this industry again. Yet you're here testifying truthfully? Yes. Because what we did was wrong. Mrs. Coleman didn't deserve any of it. Hutchins' cross-examination was brutal. He painted Victoria as a homewrecker, trying to salvage her reputation, a liar who'd manipulated Richard, and was now turning on him to save herself. Isn't it true you seduced Mr. Coleman? Hutchins demanded. We seduced each other, Victoria said quietly. I'm not claiming innocence, but I'm telling the truth about what happened. The truth according to a woman who's facing potential criminal charges for fraud? Objection, Patricia said. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Hutchins. But the damage was done. Hutchins had reminded everyone that Victoria was complicit, that her testimony might be self-serving. Still, the facts remained. The affairs, the hidden assets, the stolen credit for my work, all confirmed. After Victoria stepped down, Patricia called Michael to the stand. My son looked nervous but determined. He testified about Richard's attempt to bribe him, about the late-night drunk calls, about how Richard had removed all family photos from the house and replaced them with awards. My father used to be a good man, Michael said, but somewhere along the way, he started believing his own mythology. He convinced himself that he'd built everything alone, that Mom's contributions didn't matter. And when she challenged that narrative, he tried to destroy her. Objection, Hutchins said. The witness is speculating about Mr. Coleman's motivations. I'm testifying about what I observed and what my father told me directly, Michael shot back. He said Mom was trying to steal credit for his work. He said she'd always been jealous of his success. He said she didn't deserve anything because she hadn't earned it. Judge Reeves leaned forward. Mr. Coleman, did you say those things to your son? Richard stood reluctantly. Your Honor, I may have said things in anger during emotional moments, but... Yes or no, Mr. Coleman? Did you tell your son that his mother didn't deserve any portion of the company because she hadn't earned it? Richard's jaw tightened. Yes, but I was upset. Thank you. Please sit down, Jessica testified. Next. She described the awards dinner from her perspective. She'd attended as Richard's guest, sitting near the front. She'd seen me at the back table and assumed it was a mistake. But then I saw the way Dad looked at Victoria, Jessica said, the way they interacted, and I realized it wasn't a mistake. He deliberately humiliated Mom in front of the entire company. Objection. The witness is speculating. I'm his daughter. I've seen how he looks at people he respects versus people he's dismissed. He looked at Victoria with respect and affection. He looked at Mom like she was invisible. Jessica also testified about the phone calls, the manipulation attempts, Richard's insistence that I was mentally unstable. My mother is the strongest, sanest person I know, Jessica said, her voice fierce. She raised 3 kids while helping build a company. She maintained relationships with clients and employees. She held everything together while Dad focused on being CEO. And when he betrayed her, she stood up for herself. That's not instability. That's courage. By the time Jessica finished, several jurors were nodding. I saw Richard's face had gone pale. Day 3 began with my testimony. I was terrified, but Patricia had prepared me well. She started with basic questions: how Richard and I met, how we'd started the company, where the initial funding had come from. I inherited my mother's house when she died in 1992, I explained. It was a small house in a good neighborhood. I took out a mortgage on it and gave Richard $50,000 to start Coleman Analytics. That was my money, my risk, my belief in his vision. What role did you play in the early company? Everything. I wrote proposals, managed client communications, handled accounting, hired the first employees. Richard focused on product development. I handled everything else. When did that change? Gradually. As the company grew, Richard hired people to take over different roles. But I stayed involved, especially with major clients. Many of them had relationships with me, not Richard. Patricia walked me through decades of contributions, documented in emails and testimony from former employees. It was clear I'd been far more than a supportive wife. I'd been a genuine partner in building the company. Then came the hard part. Mrs. Coleman, when did you first suspect your husband was having an affair? I described the awards dinner in detail, the back table, Victoria's smirk, the intimate looks between her and Richard. I felt like I'd been erased, I said. Like 32 years of marriage and partnership meant nothing. I was invisible. What did you do when you got home? I looked through Richard's emails and found proof of the affair. I also found documents showing he'd been planning to divorce me and hide assets so I'd get as little as possible in the settlement. How did that make you feel? Devastated, betrayed, but also angry. I'd given him everything, and he was planning to discard me like I'd never mattered. Patricia let that sit for a moment. Then she asked, "What do you want from this trial?" "What I'm legally owed. Recognition of my ownership stake in the company I helped build. Fair division of marital assets. And an acknowledgement that my contributions mattered. That I wasn't just the wife in the background." Hutchins's cross-examination was as brutal as I'd expected. He tried to paint me as a gold digger, a bitter ex-wife, a woman who'd lived off Richard's success and now wanted to claim credit she didn't deserve. "Isn't it true you stopped working for the company 15 years ago?" "I stopped having an official role, yes, but I continued to maintain client relationships and advise on strategy." "From your home? While shopping and having lunch with friends?" "From wherever I was. Many of my most important client conversations happened at dinner parties or charity events Richard attended for business. I did the relationship building he didn't have time for." "That's not work, Mrs. Coleman. That's being a good hostess." "Then why did 3 major clients leave when I stopped being involved? Why do former employees testify that I developed frameworks the company still uses?" Hutchins tried a different angle. "You claim you invested $50,000 in 1993. Do you have proof?" "I have the mortgage documents from my mother's house and bank records showing the transfer to Richard's business account." "And you expect this court to believe that $50,000 from 30 years ago entitles you to $12 million today?" "No. I expect this court to recognize that I'm a 30% owner of a company now valued at $40 million. The math is simple." Hutchins spent 2 hours trying to shake my story, but I didn't break. I stayed calm, factual, and consistent. Every time he tried to paint me as vindictive or greedy, I brought it back to the documented evidence. When I finally stepped down, I was exhausted but relieved. I told my truth. Now it was up to the judge. Richard testified last. He was polished and charismatic, painting himself as a misunderstood entrepreneur whose personal life mistakes were being used to rob him of his professional achievements. "I made mistakes in my marriage," he admitted. "I had an affair. I hurt Catherine. I take responsibility for that, but my personal failures don't erase the fact that I built Coleman Analytics from nothing." "From nothing?" Patricia asked on cross-examination. "What about the $50,000 your wife mortgaged her mother's house to give you?" "That was a loan, which I repaid." "Do you have documentation of that repayment?" Richard hesitated. "It was years ago. I don't have records from that far back." "Convenient. What about the founding documents that list your wife as a 30% owner?" "Those were superseded by later agreements." "Agreements where you forged her signature?" "I didn't forge anything. She signed those documents." Patricia produced the documents in question. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit these to handwriting analysis. I believe we'll find that Mrs. Coleman's signature was forged." Richard's face went red. "This is ridiculous. Catherine is trying to rewrite history because she's bitter about the divorce." "I'm trying to get what I'm legally owed," I said from my seat. "You are legally owed respect and honesty," Richard shouted, turning to face me. "And I failed to give you that. I'm sorry, but you didn't build that company. I did. You were my wife, not my business partner." The courtroom went silent. Judge Reeves leaned forward. "Mr. Coleman, are you denying that your wife invested $50,000 in your company?" "No, but..." Are you denying that she's listed on the founding documents as a co-owner? Those documents were, yes or no, Mr. Coleman? No, I'm not denying that. Then her ownership stake exists, regardless of whether you've chosen to acknowledge it. This trial will determine its current value and what you owe her. But make no mistake, she is an owner. Your personal feelings about her contributions don't change that legal fact. Closing arguments came 2 days later. Patricia was masterful, weaving together all the evidence into a clear narrative of fraud, betrayal, and a woman fighting for what she'd earned. Hutchins tried to muddy the waters, but the facts were too clear. Judge Reeves took 3 days to deliberate. They were the longest 3 days of my life. Finally, we were called back to the courtroom. Judge Reeves looked tired but resolute. I've reviewed all the evidence presented, she began. This is a case about fundamental fairness and honesty. Mrs. Coleman invested her inheritance in her husband's business venture. She's listed on founding documents as a 30% owner. She contributed significantly to the company's early success and maintained important business relationships for decades. Mr. Coleman attempted to erase these contributions through fraud, forged documents, and systematic manipulation. She looked directly at Richard. Mr. Coleman, your behavior throughout these proceedings has been reprehensible. You committed fraud. You violated court orders. You harassed and intimidated your wife. You attempted to sell assets you don't fully own. These actions reflect poorly on your character and your credibility. She turned to me. Mrs. Coleman, I find your testimony credible and well supported by evidence. I'm ruling in your favor on all major points. My heart raced. Mrs. Coleman is awarded her 30% ownership stake in Coleman Analytics, valued at $12 million. Mr. Coleman will pay this amount within 90 days. Additionally, marital assets will be divided 50-50. The house, vehicles, investments, all split equally. I'm also ordering Mr. Coleman to pay Mrs. Coleman's legal fees, which exceed $300,000. Finally, I'm ordering a public correction. Mr. Coleman will issue a statement acknowledging Mrs. Coleman's role in founding the company and her contributions to its success. I couldn't breathe. I'd won. Actually won. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and suddenly, people were surrounding me. Patricia hugging me, Jessica and Michael rushing forward, reporters shouting questions. Across the room, Richard sat motionless, his face ashen. Hutchins was packing up his briefcase, already distancing himself from the loss. I'd won. After 9 months of fighting, I'd won. The first night after the trial, I slept for 12 hours straight. When I woke up, I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. I'd won. The judge had ruled in my favor on every major point. $12 million, half the marital assets, legal fees paid, a public acknowledgement of my contributions. It felt surreal. My phone had dozens of messages. Jessica and Michael checking on me. Susan wanting to celebrate. Patricia confirming next steps for the settlement. Even Amy, who'd been distant throughout the trial, had sent a text. I'm sorry I doubted you, Mom. I love you. But there was also media attention. Articles about the trial, about the verdict, about the woman who fought back and won. Some painted me as a hero. Others were less kind, calling me vindictive or suggesting I'd gotten more than I deserved. I stopped reading after a while. Public opinion didn't matter anymore. I knew the truth, and so did the court. The settlement process took 2 months. Richard fought every detail, trying to reduce the valuation of the company, arguing about which assets were marital property, disputing the legal fees. But Judge Reeves had been clear, and eventually, Richard's lawyers convinced him that further resistance was futile. The money arrived in my account on a Tuesday afternoon, $12 million. I stared at the number on my phone's banking app, unable to quite believe it was real. Susan called that evening. Are you going to buy something extravagant? A sports car? A villa in Italy? I'm going to breathe, I said. For the first time in 32 years, I'm going to breathe without worrying about someone else's expectations. But I did buy one thing, a small house on the outskirts of the city. Nothing ostentatious, just a cozy 3-bedroom with a garden and lots of natural light. It was mine, purchased with my money, and no one could take it from me. Moving in felt like closing one chapter and opening another. Jessica, Michael, and Amy all helped, bringing boxes and furniture, filling the empty rooms with laughter and family photos. The photos Richard had removed from our old house. I had copies made, and they went up on my new walls. "This place suits you," Jessica said, looking around the bright living room. "It feels like you, not like some designer's idea of you." Richard issued his public statement as ordered by the court. It was brief and clearly written by lawyers, but it existed. Catherine Coleman was instrumental in the founding of Coleman Analytics and contributed significantly to the company's early success. Her role in our partnership has been invaluable. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly gracious. But it was an acknowledgement in writing from the man who tried to erase me. I framed it and hung it in my home office. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks later. I sat in the courtroom as the judge signed the papers, officially ending my marriage to Richard Coleman. He wasn't there. He'd sent Hutchins to handle the formalities. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse alone. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. The world looked exactly the same, but I felt different. I was no longer Mrs. Richard Coleman. I was just Catherine. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. Patricia took me to lunch to celebrate. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I don't know. I've spent so long fighting, I haven't thought about what comes after." "Oh, well, you have time to figure it out. And resources. $12 million buys a lot of options." I spent the next few months rediscovering myself. I took a painting class, something I'd loved in college but abandoned when Richard said it was a waste of time. I joined a book club. I volunteered at a women's shelter, helping other women navigate divorce and rebuild their lives. I also reached out to the employees from Coleman Analytics who'd supported me during the trial, Diana especially. We met for coffee regularly, and she told me about the company's struggles. "Richard's barely there anymore," she said. After the trial, he stepped back from day-to-day operations. The board brought in a new CEO. The company's stabilizing, but it's not the same. "Are you still there?" "For now, but I'm looking at other opportunities. Too much bad history." An idea began forming in my mind. I had resources now. I had knowledge and experience. And I had something else. A network of talented people who'd been undervalued or pushed out of Coleman Analytics. I called Patricia. If I wanted to start a consulting firm, how would I do that? 2 months later, Coleman Consulting LLC opened for business. Not Coleman Analytics. That belonged to Richard, and I didn't want it. This was something new, something mine. I partnered with Diana, who became my co-founder and COO. We hired 3 other former Coleman Analytics employees who'd been pushed out for supporting me. Our specialty was helping mid-sized tech companies develop client relationship strategies and organizational culture. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was doing what I'd always done at Coleman Analytics, but now I was getting credit and compensation for it. Our first client was a startup run by a young woman who'd heard about my story. "I want to work with someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated," she said. By the end of our first year, we had 12 clients and had hired 4 more employees. We weren't competing with Coleman Analytics. We were in a different market segment, but we were successful enough that industry publications noticed. One journalist asked if I was trying to get revenge on Richard by succeeding in his industry. "No," I said simply. "I'm succeeding in my industry. This was always my field as much as his. I'm just finally getting to do it under my own name." Richard, meanwhile, had faded from public view. He'd resigned as CEO of Coleman Analytics and taken a consulting role that kept him out of the spotlight. The company had stabilized under new leadership, but had lost its industry-leading position. Victoria had left shortly after the trial, relocating to another city and another job. I heard through Diana that she'd sent me a letter once, another apology, but I'd never opened it. Some things didn't need to be revisited. Amy came to visit on a Saturday afternoon, bringing her husband and kids. We spent the day in my garden, the kids running around while Amy and I talked. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first," she said quietly. "Dad was so convincing. I thought you were overreacting." "He's always been convincing. That's what made him successful in business and devastating in personal relationships." "Do you hate him?" I thought about that. "No, I'm angry about what he did, and I'll never forgive him for trying to erase me. But hate takes too much energy. I'd rather focus on building something new." "Are you happy, Mom?" I looked around my garden, at my grandchildren playing, at the house I'd bought with my own money, at the life I'd built from the wreckage of my marriage. "Yes," I said. "I really am." 18 months after the trial, I was invited to speak at a conference on women in tech and entrepreneurship. I almost declined. I'd never been comfortable with public speaking, but Jessica convinced me. "Your story matters, Mom. Other women need to hear it." The conference was held at a hotel downtown. I arrived early, nervous about my presentation. As I checked in, I saw a familiar figure across the lobby. Richard. He was there for the same conference, apparently speaking on a different panel. He looked older, thinner, tired. Our eyes met across the crowded space. For a moment, neither of us moved. 32 years of history hung between us. The good times and the bad, the partnership and the betrayal. Then Richard started walking toward me. My bodyguard tensed, but I waved him off. "Catherine," Richard said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm speaking on the women's leadership panel." "I heard about your consulting firm. It's doing well." "Yes, it is." An awkward silence stretched between us. Then Richard said, "I read your interview in Tech Week, the one where you talked about being erased from the company's history. And you were right. I did erase you. I told myself I was just focusing on the business, but the truth is, I'd started believing my own mythology. I convinced myself I'd done it all alone." He looked down. "I'm sorry, Catherine. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine regret. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "but it doesn't change what happened." "I know. I wanted you to know that I realize now what I lost. Not the money or the company or even the marriage. I lost the person who believed in me before anyone else did. I lost my partner. And I did it through my own selfishness and cowardice." "Yes, you did." Richard nodded slowly. "I hope you're happy. Genuinely. You deserve to be." "I am happy. Genuinely." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Catherine, you built something better than I ever did. Not just the consulting firm, but the way you fought for yourself. I admire that." He walked away before I could respond. I stood there, processing the conversation, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no residual love, just a quiet sense of closure. My panel went well. I talked about my experience building Coleman Analytics, about being erased, about fighting back and rebuilding. The audience asked thoughtful questions, and several women approached me afterward to share their own stories. One woman, probably in her 50s, gripped my hand tightly. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "My husband has been doing exactly what yours did, taking credit for my work, pushing me aside. I thought I was crazy. Hearing your story gave me the courage to stand up for myself." That's when I understood why I'd been invited to speak. Not to brag about my settlement or my new company, but to show other women that they could fight back, that they could survive betrayal and build something new. 2 years after the trial, Coleman Consulting had 20 employees and annual revenue of $8 million. We'd been featured in multiple business publications and had a waiting list of clients. I'd also started a nonprofit, funded partly by my settlement money, to provide legal assistance to women going through contentious divorces with wealthy spouses. I'd seen firsthand how expensive justice could be, how many women settled for less than they deserved because they couldn't afford to fight. The nonprofit, called Second Chapter Legal Aid, helped dozens of women in its first year. Patricia sat on the board and helped train other attorneys in high-asset divorce cases. Jessica got promoted to partner at her law firm. Michael started his own business, a software company that Coleman Consulting became an early client for. Amy went back to school to get her MBA. We had family dinners at my house every month, something we'd never done when I was married to Richard. My home filled with laughter and arguments and the comfortable chaos of family life. I even started dating, though nothing serious. After 32 years of marriage, I was in no hurry to tie my life to someone else's again. But it was nice to go to dinner with someone, to have conversations that weren't about court cases or settlements, to be seen as Catherine, not as someone's ex-wife or legal opponent. One evening, I was sitting in my garden with a glass of wine, watching the sunset when my phone buzzed. An email from a journalist requesting an interview for a book she was writing about women who'd rebuilt their lives after major setbacks. I almost declined. I'd done enough interviews, told my story enough times. But then I thought about that woman at the conference, the one who'd said my story gave her courage. I thought about the women at Second Chapter Legal Aid, fighting their own battles against men who tried to make them invisible. I replied to the journalist, "Yes, I'd be happy to talk. But on one condition, you tell the whole story. Not just the dramatic parts about the trial, but what came after. The rebuilding, the new beginning, because that's the important part. Not that I fought back, but that I survived and thrived," she agreed. The book came out a year later. My story was one of 5 profiled under the chapter title Invisible No More. The journalist had captured everything, the pain, the anger, the fear, but also the strength, the resilience, the quiet victories that followed the courtroom drama. Richard was mentioned, of course. He declined to be interviewed for the book, issuing a brief statement through his lawyer. I made serious mistakes in my marriage and business practices. I've taken responsibility for those mistakes and tried to make amends. I wish Catherine well in her new endeavors. It was more gracious than I'd expected, and I wondered if he genuinely changed or if his lawyers had just written something appropriate. I decided it didn't matter. Richard's journey was his own. Mine was taking me somewhere entirely different. On the 5-year anniversary of that awards dinner, the night that changed everything, I threw a party at my house. Not a lavish affair, just close friends and family. Susan, Patricia, Diana, my kids and their families, employees from Coleman Consulting, women from Second Chapter Legal Aid. Michael gave a toast. 5 years ago, someone tried to make Mom invisible. They tried to erase her contributions, her worth, her very existence. But Mom refused to disappear. She fought back with courage and grace, and she won. More importantly, she built something beautiful from the ashes. She showed us all what resilience looks like. To Mom, the strongest person I know. Everyone raised their glasses. To Catherine, I looked around at the faces of people who valued me, who saw me, who'd supported me through the worst time of my life and celebrated with me now. This was what winning looked like. Not the money or the court victory, though those mattered. Winning was building a life where I was visible, valued, and free. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I stood in my garden under the stars. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago. Invisible, dismissed, sitting at that table by the kitchen. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who'd learned that you could lose everything and still rebuild. I pulled out my phone and looked at a photo from that night, the awards dinner before everything fell apart. In the picture, I was smiling, but my eyes looked hollow. I'd been so lost then, so erased. I deleted the photo. I didn't need reminders of who I used to be. I knew who I was now, and that was enough.